Okay, it seems like a good number of people have joined us, so I'm going to get started now. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the third installment of our Environmental Justice Speaker Series, Exploring Environmental Justice, Youth Leadership in the Boston Area, hosted in partnership with Boston University Student Government and the Boston University Medical Campus Climate Action Group. My name is Gabriela Ramirez, and I am the Engagement Manager for BU Sustainability. Our guests today will be discussing their experiences as youth leaders and organizers in the field of environmental justice. This session will be recorded, and the recording will be made available in the coming weeks with captions. We are also testing out a new Zoom feature today, which allows live auto-generated captions. They are not perfect, but they're reasonably good. And you can turn on these captions by clicking on the CC button on your Zoom taskbar if you need them. Please keep your microphones muted and your cameras off during the panel so that we can better hear our panelists. If you have any questions, please share them through the chat at any time. We will try to get to as many as we can during the Q&A. Our moderators, Sam Hall and Neha Chinwala, both students at BU, will be guiding our conversation today. Thank you so much to both of them. Before I hand it off, I want to acknowledge that universities and environmental and sustainability focus groups have historically not done a great job of addressing environmental justice and racial equity. In fact, environmental and sustainability groups have at times stood in direct opposition to and in conflict with environmental and social justice organizations. This needs to change. There is no sustainable future if it isn't also just. Health, racism, classism, poverty, and climate change are all interrelated topics, and the ways in which we address them need to be intersectional too. At its core, sustainability is about people and the future that we want to build together, and the kind of world that we want to live in. If we are reimagining and rebuilding our communities, justice and equity need to be a part of that equation for all of our sakes. We at BU Sustainability are not experts on environmental justice, and that is why we have invited practitioners with on-the-ground experience in these issues. I want to thank them for their time. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Sam, who will walk us through a very brief poll to get to know who is in our audience today, and then we'll introduce the panelists. Take it away, Sam.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Gabriela. My name is Sam Hall. My pronouns are she, hers, and I'm one of the leaders for the BU Medical Campus Climate Action Group. I'm a second-year MPH student as well at BU. I have the pleasure of introducing our hosts today, then I'll pass it off to Neha Chinwala to facilitate audience questions. We're excited to spend the majority of our time on audience questions, so please be sure to put them questions and comments in the chat, or you can send them directly to myself or to Neha. Now we'll take a minute to fill out this poll just to give us a better idea of who's in the audience, which will hopefully add to what I'm sure will be a fruitful conversation. So if you could fill out these questions, that would be great. In a couple more seconds, I'll ask Gabriela to share the results of the poll, which you can look at together. I'm getting a thumbs up. I don't see anything on my screen, but I'm not sure if others can see the poll results. Oh, great. Okay. So about 80% of the audience participants are affiliated with BU. Welcome to non-BU community members as well. We have about 75% students, 10% faculty, 6% staff, 2% BU alum, and some family members and others. Great. And over close to 80% is their first session. So thanks everyone for being here. It's very helpful. Thank you. Okay, great. So now I'm so excited to introduce our first panelist, Gabriela Ramirez, who is a sophomore at BU pursuing a degree in political science. The Boston Community Liaison for the BU Student Government's Department of City Affairs and an assistant for BU's Initiative on Cities, Gabriela is passionate about environmental and social justice, youth empowerment, and immigrant rights. She's a lifelong resident of East Boston, has worked at the nonprofit Neighborhood of Affordable Housing, or NOAA, and is a proud daughter of Salvadoran immigrants. Gabriela hopes to become a lawyer and run for political office in the future. And now I'm happy to introduce Kamini Malik, who is a Climate Justice and Education Fellow at Youth on Board, which is an organization that trains and supports youth organizers. In the second year of her master's degree in medical anthropology at the BU School of Medicine, Kamini studies the youth experiences of climate change activism, and health. She's also interested in how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected activism and engagement for young people. Next, we're so grateful to have Fiona Fee joining us today. A current student at UMass Boston, the executive director of March for Our Lives Boston, and an executive board member of Red House, Fiona is a community organizer focused on borderless liberation. First interested in activism through anti-sweatshop campaigns, their work now focuses on gun violence prevention, education equity, climate justice, and income inequities. Fiona works to integrate the intersections of issues that affect people into building power. And last, we're so excited to have Sean Du on our panel. With a BS in economics and programs in the environment from University of Michigan, Sean is dedicated to building energy equity in historically disenfranchised communities. A project associate at Sunwealth, Sean works on projects surrounding climate change and to transform the power infrastructure through local partnerships across the renewable energy industry. Sean is also a volunteer at the Boston Hub of Sunrise Movement, where he helps connect new volunteers with different areas of Sunrise. We're so grateful for the perspectives of these four panelists. Thank you so much all for being here today. And now, would you mind sharing with us how you define environmental justice and what does environmental justice mean to you? If it's okay, let's go ahead and start with Gabriela.
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you for having me, and I'm so excited to be talking about my experience as a youth organizer. So environmental justice, when I first started organizing, I didn't really have a set definition of what it was, but I was always hearing about it. And through my experiences of organizing and working with some of my colleagues, the definition that lives in my heart is environmental justice is when no community has more or less environmental burdens compared to other communities despite their race, income, and other demographics. And so I see this definition through the perspective of my community. I am a resident of East Boston. I've been here my entire life. And East Boston is an environmental justice community. We only have one access point to the harbor. We have the airport. We live right across from Chelsea where there's the salt pile. And when I was at NOAA, we did some research and we found out that East Boston only has 1,924 trees, which is only 15% coverage of what we could have if a tree was planted every 25 feet. And you don't see these problems in communities like Brookline, Newton, because those communities are made up of white people. East Boston is home of people of color, immigrants, people that live in bedrooms, they share closets. Our community faces environmental burdens because of who we are.
Thank you so much. How about Kamini?
Yeah, so I also similarly didn't really understand what environmental justice was until I started really working with Youth on Board. And I will be very honest, I've only been doing this for maybe a year or two, and I still learn so much from the young people that I work with. But in kind of something, it occurs to me that, the word environment itself has such a broad scope, right? Like sometimes we say environment and we think of the nature and the green spaces outside and the air and etc. Very in terms of natural or science kind of thinking. But I think environment has a lot more to do with that. It's that and more. So I would say environmental justice, true environmental justice is when all groups of people, especially those who inhabit marginalized intersectional identities, are able to not only live in healthy surroundings and healthy environment, however they define that for themselves, but really are able to thrive in it. Because it's one thing to be able to live in a certain place, but another thing to really thrive and call that your own and grow. And so to me, it also encompasses things like food justice, housing justice, educational justice, and especially I think this is all underpinned with racial justice. So we certainly aren't there yet. And I think that's why all of these amazing panelists and like the places that they're from, the organizations that they're from, like this is why we fight, right? But yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Definitely important that environment has lots of definitions. How about Fiona?
Hello, everybody. I definitely appreciate this question. Like the other panelists, I barely thought of the actual definition of environmental justice. First of all, I'm definitely not an academic in this area, but I've cared about environmental justice my whole entire life. And to simply put it, environmental justice is racial justice. You do not have the other without one. And it is indigenizing and decolonizing the ways in which we think about our practices and centering justice, communities, and people, and taking accountability and understanding what does accountability mean, and putting that simple idea and implementing it into various areas of our lives, and truly understanding what it means to be accountable, what self-accountability is, and how you can use transformative justice and have those different concepts come together and create this world that we are trying to reimagine that is safe and equitable for everybody.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. And Sean.
Yeah, definitely echoing all of the panelists' thoughts on this, but no, to me, environmental justice has never been about the environment, right? It's about economic and racial justice. Growing up, I did a lot of work in Detroit, Michigan, an area that was hit super hard by the fall of industrialization and kind of afterwards, terrible environmental degradation. And just from the lived experiences of meeting these people who are exposed to pollutants of, lead, carbon dioxide, they live worse lives, they live shorter lives, they live less unhealthy lives. It impacts their long-term earnings because they can't work, they're sick for a large portion of their lives. And this burden has historically fell upon communities of color in the area. And because of these economic burdens, they often can't leave. They're kind of trapped in this cycle of having to stay where they are because it's the only place they can find work, having where they are impacting their health and not letting them get enough income to leave that area. So in summary, yeah, just everything they've said about environmental justice is about recognizing the disparities in economic well-being that have impacted our health and how disproportionately that has fallen on these communities of color.
Absolutely. Thank you all for these definitions. I think it's important and interesting that, environmental justice means a lot of things, but at the base is racial equity and social equity in a lot of different forms. And we don't have to go in order, we can if you want, but maybe now you could all speak on how you first got involved or interested in EJ and maybe what kind of work you're focusing on now.
I can start. Oh, I said I can start and then 2 or 3 people unmuted. Isn't that always happens in class? So I actually got started working as an intern at Youth on Board in 2019. That's now 2 years ago, right? I'm like, what is time? But I started because through my graduate program, I wanted to talk to and just kind of understand what young people in this climate movement are experiencing and doing, and really like what activism means to them. So I found Youth on Board. And so just for context, Youth on Board co-administers a program called BSAC, Boston Student Advisory Council. And this is a program that has representatives from almost all, I think, if not all, public high schools in Boston right now. And so they work on a lot of things, but I was particularly interested in their environmental justice subcommittee. So that's kind of how I started. And just by joining this program, I've learned so much from the young people in what they do, and the kind of passion that they have for this. They're especially interested in fighting for making sure that young people are in the movement and are seen and are heard and are at the table, so to speak, because oftentimes we develop policy and we develop different kinds of agendas that affect young people, but don't actually take young people into consideration, right? And especially like when we think about climate change, the young people are going to be the most affected by this. So that's kind of like where I've started. And then some of the things that I do right now are we're trying to promote climate education throughout all Boston public schools, including elementary, like down from the elementary school level up to high school, because I don't think there's any sort of specific age where you can, start talking about climate change. I think it's appropriate and important for every person to understand what is going on, because that makes them a little more knowledgeable, and then hopefully just more aware of how it's going to impact them.
I can go next. I got started with EJ. I think my relationship with environmentalism in general, or whatever you want to call it. So I also grew up in East Boston, and my brother has asthma. So, we live nearby the airport, and we live by the trucks going in and out of our community, and the ports, the salt, everything. And I think like in the 5th or 6th grade, we had a lot of like people come in from all over for trying to revitalize or okay, my school called it D-gang affiliation, but we got a lot of like after school programs basically, and one of those things was picking up and taking pictures of like cigarette butts and litter and all these other things, and very much placing the blame on us for our problems. And I think like that definitely highlighted a huge disconnect for me, even in the 6th grade. So experiencing environmental racism and not realizing it happens from a very early age, especially both of our experiences coming from East Boston, I'm sure are very parallel to each other. And, after my parents had gotten their green card, I took my first trip back to the motherland. So I went to Indonesia, and it was really dope. And the other thing I saw was people getting exploited everywhere, and people dumping, or factories dumping chemicals into the water. And literally, when I tell you, you could smell it from like miles away. Like we were driving past and we were in the car, fully windows up and everything. You still smell it. And when I tell you, you can smell like poverty, exploitation, like it was a feeling. It wasn't a particular smell. But that stuck with me. And I was like 13, 14 at the time. And I came back to the United States, and I was telling my friends about it. I was like, yo, I dare y'all to buy from Nike ever again. Like, we are gonna have a conversation about this. I was very passionate about stopping sweatshop labor. And earlier I was talking about that aspect of accountability, and how one person can definitely take a role. And even though I can't go to Congress as a 13-year-old and change the law myself, I can definitely advocate and reduce my waste and my consumption. And I think it was like, and as soon as I got into like organizing work, my field is mostly in racial justice and equity. So I started off in education and racism. I went to Boston Latin Academy, and if you're from Boston, you know what's up, because the whole entire education system in Boston is very much placed on white supremacy. So you get to test into a school, and in order to test into a school, you need resources. And when we got there, even the schools that you get into are tiered. And if you get into the best school, it's basically a white school. And the second one, you know, a little mix of everybody. And then the third is definitely mainly Black and brown students. And my experiences going to BLA, which was the second one, was very much orienting myself with this idea of race. We also live in redline neighborhoods. So if you grow up in your neighborhood, you go to high school in your neighborhood, you're probably going to see only people who look like you. But if you go to one of these exam schools, you're going to see many different people from many socioeconomic backgrounds. And, you know, even, and we were talking about environmentalism, our communities, and, you know, we're not academics or anything, we're middle school and high school students, but we know, we understand. And knowing our stories got me into this work, got me to really think critically about how the system treats us as students, and then also as people who have power, and what our relationship with that is, and how do we mobilize and build power structures that are bottom-up solutions that include the people, instead of having folks come from the suburbs telling us, okay, you guys need to pick up your trash, you guys need to do this, you need to do that. I don't get why you guys are still eating unhealthily. Okay, give us resources to fix our food deserts in our communities. And that's really just how I got started in organizing, was just really hearing all the messed up things. And I now work in gun violence prevention, same deal, just a different issue, and understanding like this is globally impacting each other and it's all connected. So yeah.
Yeah, that was awesome, Fiona. Thank you so much for sharing. I know personally, my family grew up on the shores of Lake Erie, which, if a lot of you don't know, is most famous for catching on fire about 16 different times throughout the past, 100 years. And that was because of the crazy amount of pollutants being dumped into this lake over, the 50, 60 years. And my family growing up lived in a small town called Monroe, Michigan, that was maybe about 2 miles from a local nuclear plant. It melted down multiple times when they lived there. They had multiple times that toxic waste was dumped into this lake miles upstream from this place they would drink from, play from, in a daily basis. And the neighborhood, people's lives were reflective of that. 2 uncles were diagnosed with cancer before the age of 10 years old. My father was diagnosed with Parkinson's, which has inhibited his ability to work for the past decade and a half. So seeing the corporate irresponsibility impact people's day-to-day lives, seeing, neighbors die at a young age, seeing people lose work, be on disability, you see these tangible effects from the negligence of governments intervening in, these very preventable things. So my lenses historically come from, creating a corporate landscape that actually serves the needs of the people, while also providing for the healthiest outcomes physically possible. So that's kind of my background, and what really got me interested in preventing these terrible, costly outcomes in life for something that they don't have any control over.
Yeah, so I have been an organizer my entire life. And I say it because my mom is an organizer. And I remember being 3 years old with my Dora the Explorer backpack, marching at Copley Square for immigrant rights. My mom is an organizer for immigration. And so when I was little, I knew a lot about immigration that I think a 6-year-old doesn't normally know, but I'm very happy to know about that. And so since I was little, I knew that my community was facing many injustices. I knew that there was an issue that there wasn't that many parks, and I'm pretty sure Fiona can agree with me. There was a couple parks. Some of them have just gotten renovated, but when I was little, they were not looking as green as they are right now. The beaches, we only have one beach. You don't go swimming there because it's not good water quality. Parents work 2 to 3 jobs. Kids stay with babysitters. Um, Kids don't know how to do their homework because their parents don't know English, but their parents don't have the money to pay for them to have a tutor. And so they're teaching themselves how to read, how to write, how to defend themselves and learn a new language when they don't have even their parents to protect them. And so I knew about this since I was young. And I always said, when I'm older, I know that it's not going to be a problem anymore. Lies, that's not, it's still a problem. I see it every day. But I formally started organizing, no longer marching with a little Dora the Explorer backpack when I was 14. So about 6 years ago when I joined NOAA. And um I started looking more at where I could be an influence to the policies that were being made and impacting my community. And so we have a saying, when you go marching, people see young people. One of my biggest pet peeves is when people are like, oh my God, it's so great to see you here. It's so great to see someone so young doing this. And it's like, yes, I am young, but why is that important to you? And they're like, oh, because this is the future, blah blah. And my response is always, young people are not the future. We're the now and the future. We are the ones going to be impacted by all the decisions that are being made right now. There's a substation that's being built a couple blocks down from where I live. And at the hearing, I wasn't able to testify, but I wanted to tell everyone that was talking, like, you don't live here. Why are you making the decisions about my community? You're not planning to have kids and start a family here. I am. So why do you get to decide the way that we're going to continue living here? And so my work at NOAA has allowed me to understand that even though at the time I wasn't 18 and I couldn't vote, I couldn't tell a politician, hey, if you don't do this, I'm not voting for you. But I did learn that by going to a march, by saying, this is what I believe in. And if you don't listen to me, I have like 25 other young people who can influence their older siblings, their parents to not vote for you, to not elect you because you don't represent us. And so that's where my experience came from.
Thank you all so much for sharing these really powerful and personal connections to the justice movement. As illustrated, this is not issues, these issues are not just in Boston, not just in the US, but really represent global systemic neglect. So thank you for sharing. This is our last question before we jump into some audience questions. If you could all answer what you hope to see in the future of environmental justice, and especially in relation to youth engagement and activism.
So coming from kind of the energy space, I think the thing that, we're the most excited about and looking forward to is actually engaging more youth in employment opportunities. I think historically, renewable energy has been an extremely white space. So I think over the past year and a half, there's been a strong movement to get more people involved in the energy space at all facets, be it financing, building, et cetera. And I know one of the things that we're personally pushing for and trying to help seed is a Black-owned solar installation company, because there's actually not a single one in the entire state of Massachusetts. So I think one of the things I hope to see more of the movement is corporations, people, governors stepping up to try and not just say like, hey, teach you more about it, but actively go out and promote youth involvement in creating the future job landscape, because bringing those ideas, bringing those experiences of people who've not been able to be involved, I think is super important in addressing the issues of those neighborhoods and the places that they live. So.
Yeah, I definitely feel like in the future, I hope when we talk about environmental justice, it is way more nuanced than it is right now. And it doesn't just center, you know, how many jobs can we make from the environmental economy and all these different like business-centered ways of problem solving and think tanking environmental solutions, right? And not only just saying like thinking about, you know, what is happening in the environment, but also going back to people, and actually going back to people, rooted in community, rooted in honoring the land, honoring ancestors, and honoring people, and really creating space to actually talk about how do we create this system, because environmental impacts are just a symptom of a larger problem. And you know, when we just talk about the environment, we're just scratching the surface of what the issue is. And so we got to go deeper and talk about what is rooted in the issues that happen. Okay, you know, if we take, for example, environmental impacts in Latin America, and we think that, okay, that issue is completely separate from migration issues, you are mistaken. So, you know, we have to talk about why does displacement happen and why does social infrastructure continuously crumble. And, you know, I think like I have to definitely mention the fact that there is one of the biggest movements going on for environmental justice, for labor, going on right now in India. And people are not talking about this. And, you know, farmers are coming together collectively, bargaining their power with the government to say, like, we're sick of y'all trying to give us performative legislation that protects us. Give us some real protection and stop selling us to companies. And, you know, that's a labor issue that is completely tied with the environmental impacts, because you think that farmers really want to hurt the environment? Most likely, no, they don't. They want to survive and thrive. So how do we meet people's and communities' needs? Actually meet people's needs, and not the bare minimum, okay? Not just, okay, you can have 200 calories per day type of situation. No, how do we actually meet people's actual needs, what their wants are, so that we can address the larger problem? And I think like we need to start talking about some really big issues and come up with very small community-based solutions. And I'm just hoping that EJ brings that aspect to the conversation to environmentalism.
Could have not said it better. Thanks, Sean and Fiona, about really good points. I see a lot happening in the future. And I think one thing I really want to see in the future, and I touched about it a little bit before, but it's that idea of normalizing young people having power and having a decision-making power, both in their community and at the table. You know, I can't say it enough, but organizing as a young person, the first thing that I always talk about when I was organizing with young people when I was at NOAA, the first question was, do they even listen to us? And when I told them yes, they would be like, well, they were like, but I'm 14, like I can't vote, my parents can't vote, like what do I say? And I'm like, in 4 years you're voting. And then I was like, and at the end of the day, they are your representatives, they represent your community, you live here, they have to listen to you. And it was kind of the idea of breaking the ice so that young people understand that no matter their age, they have a right to speak up. They have a right to engage with people that have decision-making power. They have a right to be listened to. And I cannot like tell you how many times we went to community meetings where we were the only young people in the room And you could tell that the adults felt some type of way, especially, you know, it's brown students that are in the room with white people saying like, look, you're making all these decisions for us, but what about this? What about this? Like, having the evidence of what needs to be changed, that was not an easy conversation to start. And I'm pretty sure once COVID is able to allow in-person meetings, you'll see, if you come to a meeting, you'll see that young people feel comfortable stepping up and being like, you can't build this building right in front of the park. You can't cut down these trees because look, we barely have any to begin with. And so I think we need to start normalizing that idea of listening to the people that are suffering the most and letting them tell you, this is what you need to do for me. Not you coming in and saying, this is what needs to be done in order to fix your problems. Because it's not what you're supposed to do. It's what we want and what we know we need.
I don't think I can add anything too substantial to the already amazing conversations that have happened so far. And I think I just want to echo what everyone has said, especially Gabriela, what you said just now. I think absolutely, absolutely, we need to grow this movement with those people in power and them first, which is like young people, people who are most affected by these issues. They need to have not only a seat at the table, but the head of the table. Because what I've seen also a lot is that under the pretense of diversity, under the pretense of I've included you, we're now all sitting together trying to talk about ideas, and the young person, the brown person are just shut down or given barely enough time to speak. But just in terms of performance, they'll say, oh, look, we've included these groups, we've included these historically marginalized groups. But what happens at those meetings is they need to be the ones in power. They need to be the one leading the conversation because it impacts them the most. And they're the ones that get shut down way too often. So that's what I hope to see in the future.
Thank you all so much. These are really, really powerful words. I'm now going to hand it off to Neha. We have some great audience questions.
Hey everyone, thanks Sam. I'm Neha. I'm a student at BU and the Director of Environmental Affairs for BU Student Government. So since we only have 20 more minutes left, I'm just gonna ask like some of the questions from the audience, and you don't all four have to answer unless you want to. But the first one actually is specifically for Kamini, sorry. In your introduction, Sam talked about how you are interested in the intersection of like how COVID-19 has affected youth organizing. So we were wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so this is interesting because the thesis that is produced from this research is due on Sunday. So let's see how well I can articulate what I've tried to type and read. So obviously, I think this pandemic has really influenced all of us in a variety of ways, and kind of highlighted especially how unjust and inequitable our system runs, just in all aspects, medical, environmental, everything. But from what I've seen from the young people that I work with, they're incredibly resilient people. So yes, like we all suffer Zoom fatigue. I don't know how many of you have gone from one meeting to the next, and you seem like you're just staring at a screen all day. And so I will say, like, sometimes it can feel on a day-to-day basis that what are we actually getting done? Like what's happening? We're not together anymore in a space. But what they've done is really created a beautiful space on Zoom where they support each other, where they are always thinking about what are we going to do next? What is the win? So we especially now we think about like what are the small things that we've done that make an impact. And so I think in terms of that, it's been amazing to see. I was like, thankfully I got to start with them when we were all in person and then to shift to online. It's amazing to see that their activism has not stopped. They're their fighting has not stopped. In fact, I think we've just increased. And we've continued and we've powered on and we've figured out ways to hold community gatherings over Zoom, very similar to this one. They've held like town halls talking about environmental justice, mental health during the pandemic, education justice. So they're not stopping, and neither should we.
That's so lovely to hear. And also, if you could share how people can like participate in those town halls, maybe in the chat, I think that would be great, because I think there would be a lot of interest here. But the next question, I guess anyone can answer, but it's from your experiences, how do you suggest that people who have more environmental privilege or who live outside of the communities that they're hoping to help, how should they contribute or support the movement without centering themselves?
Money. Seriously, money talks. If you got privilege, open your wallet. You feel me? Like, it's really that simple. Like, these groups really need money. I can tell you 10 out of 10, every grassroots organization I've ever been a part of struggles with money. And it's unfortunate, but it's the truth. Definitely volunteering with organizations who are specifically geared towards being allies to other Black and Brown centered organizations are cool too. So for example, Sunrise is a really great example of like doing like amplifying legislative policies that that have boosted or center Black and Brown communities in terms of environmentalism. And I think like if you want, like simply show up, like, I don't know, especially when it comes to advocacy and legislation and things that center policy, the simplest thing you can do is show up to lobby days, show up in your legislator's inbox, show up with those phone calls. When people say call, call. When people say email, email. And it's the tedious part about organizing is trying to get as many people as possible to show up in those forums, because it really puts pressures on legislators. In terms of like the grassroots or like the social interactions and programming and things like that, I mean, you can also just be straight up and ask like, hey, what do y'all need? And I think it never hurts to ask people like, what do you need? Instead of offering what you have and being like, do you need this? Be like, what do you need? And let me see if I can find somebody or use my resources to help you and provide those things. And I think like also, if you're part of a community who typically gets a lot of the coverage and all these other things, like just take a step back and highlight and amplify what other folks are doing, simply.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And you also mentioned as one of the organizations, the Sunrise Movement. So I thought I would pass it over to Sean to talk a little bit about that, since you have some involvement there.
Yeah, no, I would love to. In context of the original question, or?
If you want to, or you can just talk about like your work at Sunrise and how people could get involved there as well.
Yeah, no, I think my big thing is echoing what Fiona said, is showing up, right? People always talk about lobbying as like this kind of cool, large scale change. And sometimes like it's really just writing emails and sending texts and getting people involved. So I think 100% of that. And I think just like acknowledging someone who comes from a place of a lot of environmental privilege is just like learning to be uncomfortable in a lot of conversations and situations, in a way of just like hearing people out, like putting yourself in a place where you're not spearheading the conversation, you're not leading the conversation, and just like listening, I think is huge. And I think that's something we're trying to do more in Sunrise, is like practice bringing people into that fold, practice being listeners. Because I think, a lot of the times you're moving at 100 miles an hour, and being really thoughtful of who you include and how you have these conversations, and realizing like your time's best used on great ideas, not just good ideas. So making sure everyone's involved to help make the greatest idea you can. So.
That's great. Thank you, Sean. The next question is, what do you all suggest as a first step for getting involved in environmental justice organizing? So I know all of you have been involved in it for a long time. You know, Gabriela told us about her experience with her Dora backpack, but for someone who really cares about it but isn't sure how to start, especially if they're students, what do you all suggest?
I think one of the most important things is that if you want to get involved and you feel like you don't know where to start with, I think always Googling like environmental justice organizations in blank community, and you get to see which organizations are involved in the community, and you get to see the work that they're doing. And honestly, when I worked at NOAA, one of the things that I didn't really see much of, but was people reaching out and asking for more information about the projects we're doing, or just asking on how they could be involved. There's a lot of ways that you can be involved in the organization. I think definitely Fiona said money is one thing, but if you don't have money, your time, you can join us to rally. You can join us by volunteering. Over the summer, when I was at NOAA, every summer we would water street trees in all of East Boston. So every week, 2,000 trees would get watered by 10 people, and we only had 3 bikes. So that says a lot about the time and effort that we spent those summers. And I think if you know how to ride a bike, hit up an organization that's going to be watering trees for 5 hours a day. I mean, it's really the small things that you can do to start engaging yourself with the different movements that are being done in different communities.
Yeah, and I would say don't be afraid to join. Like bring a friend, because I'm telling you, we need you. We need everyone to be involved in this, because it affects you, it affects me, it affects the people right now, it affects people in the future. So don't be afraid. Literally, like I would be surprised if you walked into an organization or entered a meeting and they wouldn't want you there. They would be excited to have you there.
No, 100% on what everyone said. That's awesome. Be there. Everyone, like, reach out to people. I've never met someone in the environmental movement who's been mean or not wanted to talk about the environmental movement, which is great. I know my tough thing, like going in, is always like, I'm usually super gung ho, and people do amazing stuff like watering trees on bikes. That's great. Which has led me to actually like overcommit myself. So like I think just like having a really good assessment of like what is the most meaningful to you, and looking at your own time, because like when you get involved, like do something all the way, be 100%, be present for these things, because we want you and we need you. So just knowing yourself, showing up, and being super stoked about it.
All right, so one of the things you could do is definitely hit up your local community garden. That's always a really, you'll always have a community garden somewhere. And so some specific organizations to look out for: Green Roots in Chelsea. They also do work in Eastie. They're really dope. Look up Sunrise. Follow your local Indigenous folks. Follow their Facebook or Twitter, whatever. See what announcements they come up with. And yeah, like just start to, you can basically inquire about it with any youth organization, and they'll probably direct you to somebody. And just be tenacious and willing to give your time, and just go with it and try to find which group fits you. So there's so many people out there.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that advice. So we only have a few more minutes, but I think we can get one or two more questions in. So one is more of like to end on a positive note, like who or what inspires you in your work? You know, like when the days get rough, what keeps you going?
I could start. I think I have two inspirations. The first one I think might be obvious. My mom. I've learned to organize because of her. My mom immigrated here from El Salvador. She and my dad were both lawyers in El Salvador, and here, unfortunately, they haven't been able to receive the education so that they can practice what they love. But that hasn't stopped them from making a home here. And so one of my biggest inspiration is my mom. She's been working two jobs since I was little, hasn't stopped. It's been like 18 years, and she always has a smile on her face. That's one of my biggest inspirations. And the second is my community. I look at everything I do through the perspective of how I'm going to make a positive impact in my community. And so I'm a commuter student. I go to BU, but I don't live on campus. And one of the reasons is because I wanted to stay involved in my community. And I continued to organize my first year. I was going to clubs, making friends on campus, but I was still involved at NOAA. And I know some people were like, well, you can live on campus, blah, blah. I was like, it's just a train ride. I'm still here, and I was still able to do everything I wanted. And so everything I do is through the perspective of how I'm going to impact my community. I'm studying political science. I want to go to law school because I want to stay in my community. I want to eventually buy a house with my mom here in EC, because I'm here to stay. I want to make this community a better community for future generations. I think I talked a lot about what growing up here was, and there's not a lot of resources for young people. I want to do that. One of my biggest goals is to open a youth center here. We don't have one, and that's something that's missing. And I want to be able to say I grew up in a wonderful community that I love, and I'm making it better because I know it can be even better for the generations to come.
Yeah, definitely. Along the same lines is community, family, friends, loved ones. Like those are the people who keep me accountable to self-care, first of all. And then secondly, inspire me every day to continue going. I definitely want to bring in some folks who've been in the organizing space. May Chen, who is a immigrant workers justice organizer from Boston and ended up organizing all across the country for labor rights for garment workers in the 80s. Her work, it definitely inspires me. Mia Mingus, a transformative justice practitioner who centers her work in disability justice, is another person who inspires me a lot, and like looking onto their work definitely keeps me going. And the many other organizers who are out there who I'm trying to honor their work by continuing their legacy to this day, I think is worth mentioning as well.
Yeah, I just want to echo, for me, I mean, my family is everything. I wouldn't be here without my family, but especially to do this work and to stay involved in this work, and to especially, like, I'm now more interested in looking at the intersections of environmental health and public health. But this all is inspired by and I continue to learn from the young people that I work with. So this group of people that I got to spend time with and work with every day are absolutely incredible. Like I don't have any other synonyms for that, because it's just like they're incredible. They're incredible and fantastic, and they teach me new things every single day. And like even today, this morning, a lot of them were on so there's a Massachusetts Renews organization. It was previously the Massachusetts Green New Deal. They changed their name to Massachusetts Renews, and they had their launch today. And one of the facilitators was a young person that I work with who got to introduce like Senator Ed Markey and Ayanna Pressley, and like does not bat an eye. They're they're just truly, truly amazing group of people. And so I would encourage everyone to really like talk to the people around you, but especially talk to the young people around you, because they'll surprise you and you will learn a lot from them. But that's something that keeps me going for sure. It's them. And then they're all just so incredibly loving people, and they kind of just enveloped me into their family. So they're the reason that I'm here.
I honestly think events like this are really what give me a ton of joy and a ton of mission, just like seeing so many people doing so many amazing things from so many different walks of life is just like so inspiring, and kind of, definitely grounds you in like, sometimes you feel alone when you're talking about this stuff, but like realizing that it is just such a wave of people is awesome. And I honestly think the other big one is like simple things like just being able to take a walk outside and being present in the environment and this space that we're fighting for, and recognizing, something as simple as a local park can have so much meaning, because, in a world that's getting more and more commodified, a place that is for everyone, I think is just so special. So.
All right, well, thank you all for those answers. Such a lovely way to close out our panel discussion. But I will bring back Gabriela from BU Sustainability to close us out.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to our moderators. I do have some more information to share with you, and I have a quick poll to launch before we close out, but I just want to say thank you first and foremost, because I know some of our panelists need to hop off right away. So thank you so much for your time, and we are just so grateful to have you here today. So I'm going to quickly share my screen. I also wanted to share these further reading and resources if you are very interested in the topic of environmental justice. And then finally, this is the information for all of the organizers for this event: BU Sustainability, BU Student Government, and BUMC Climate Action Group. I know there was a question in the chat about the Climate Action Group. So this is how you can learn more about the Climate Action Group. And then I think Sam has made note of who asked that question, and we'll try to reach out to you. I'm going to launch a quick poll that is just going to ask you about how this event went. And we really appreciate this because it helps us make it better and better next time. So the more that we can get feedback on what's working and what's not working, then we can improve. So I really appreciate any feedback you can give us through this form. Or, if you want to reach out to us at the information that is on the screen right now to give other kinds of feedback, feel free to do so as well. And just thanks for spending this last hour with us talking about these really important issues. I'm going to give the floor back to Neha and Sam in case they want to say anything before we wrap up.
You go ahead, Sam.
Thanks so much, everyone, for coming, and all the panelists were absolutely incredible. We really appreciate it.
I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Sean, Gabriela, Kamini, any last words?
No, just thank you so much for inviting us and having us here. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yes, thank you so much for having us and for listening to our experiences, and I hope that you're able to get organized.
No, I appreciate the time of my fellow panelists as well. And yeah, this was amazing. Thank you so much.
Well, everybody have a great night. Get in touch, get involved, get inspired, You can be a part of this movement. Anyone can be a part of this movement. It doesn't matter what your age is. It doesn't matter how much you know right now. If you have the desire to help, you can do something. So with that, I'm going to say good night.